Hi everyone, I'm Anouk De Silva. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and this is a brief introduction to my debut novel, which has just been officially released. It's called The End of Madness. I started writing this book in 2016, but at the time it was a very different story, much less developed. Initially it was about a young man who attempts suicide. He's admitted to a mental hospital and tries to come to terms with life and find meaning and purpose while he's institutionalized. So that was a fairly basic idea. I'm not even sure it was an original plot, to be honest. But then events in my life took something of a turn, actually several turns, and the writing stagnated for some time. To cut a long story short, I had some traumatic experiences following a meltdown, and when I explained what had happened to my mum, she was very concerned about the choices I'd made. Somehow during that conversation, I don't recall exactly how it came up, but I mentioned that I was autistic. And this is something I'd known for years but never talked about. I'd never even brought it up with anyone before, but I had always been the weird kid or the weird guy. Anyhow, this was a turning point in my life because we decided to get a formal diagnosis. That process wasn't just difficult and expensive, it was extremely stressful because it took place at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it marked a turning point in my life. So that diagnostic process took over a year to complete, but once I had the official diagnosis, everything not only made sense, but actually became easier for me because I knew where I stood, and with the psychiatrist's recommendation, I was eventually approved for the disability pension, and that was a massive relief. Things had never worked out for me in the rat race. So at this point I knew I had taken the right step because it also meant I would be free and at ease of mind so I could finish the writing at my own pace, in my own time. So that's what I started to do. Believe it or not, although I'd been officially writing this novel for 5 years or so, it was still very much in its early stages. So now, as I mentioned, it was a pretty basic story and possibly an unoriginal one as well when I'd started writing it. But after those landmark experiences, everything fell into place and I realized that I now had a unique story to tell, one of far more substance and depth. Now, I'd always been something of a political activist on social media. I don't really care for the term activist, I'm a socialist. And I've always sought to share the knowledge and perspective I've gained through my readings and observations. When I joined several online forums related to autism and neurodiversity, I now began to see and understand the experiences and struggles of other autistic and neurodivergent people around the world. I learnt so much about neurodiversity and its fundamental relation to the human condition, and that really fired my conviction that I was finally on the right path with the novel. So I spent the next year putting all that insight into my writing, and by the time I'd finished, I knew it was something special because it came from what was now a familiar place within me that I'd nevertheless only just discovered. Now, I don't want to give away too many spoilers or anything here because I think this is the sort of book you should read and digest for yourself without being too aware of the plot in advance. One reason for that is the way I've written it, it actually appears to be a relatively simple story on the surface, yet it does attempt to address and tackle the most pressing issues facing humankind, particularly right now. Someone recently asked me what genre it falls into. I'd classify it as speculative fiction, which is a broad category that encompasses the dystopian fiction genre. I think many people these days feel like dystopia is already here, given what's happening in the world. So, that said, I'll explain a few things about the story. It's set in the near future, maybe several decades from now. There are no specific dates given, although we're told that World War III has been going on for some time, which was contrary to initial expectations. And it's set in an isolated town on Australia's lower east coast, not far from Sydney, where I live, but a remote community where people have been going through extremely difficult times for some time, and things appear to be getting worse on every front, which I think is what people have grown accustomed to in our time. So it is something of a dystopian setting, but one whose elements I think readers will recognise too. For example, the pandemics are rampant, people everywhere are sick and desperate and tired. Climate change seems out of control, there's violent political instability and so on. So you don't have to be familiar with the central subject matter, which is autism, to relate to this story, because it's all there to some degree. So against this backdrop, the story takes place in this town, which is called Lark's End, and the events that unfold specifically surround this institution, Rainbow Lighthouse, which through the development of my initial draft went from being a mental hospital to a specialist centre for autistic and neurodivergent young people. The protagonist is a young man whose fate leads him to this place, to being admitted and then assessed, and it goes from there. As I said, I don't want to reveal too much here, but I do want to say this to readers. When you read this novel, I'd encourage you to look for the subtleties amidst what's at times a gritty and confronting series of events. So I hope you all read The End of Madness, enjoy it, and learn something from it. But I also hope that it sparks the sort of public discussion that I think all art should. Also, and this is important, if you're a producer or you have connections to any studios, my ultimate dream with this is to have it adapted for the screen. I think it would lend itself better to a Netflix series than a feature film, but I would be happy to discuss that and work on either one, as long as I'm directly involved with the screenplay. I do have some ideas for that as well. So please hit me up if you have any thoughts or you're able to help. That would be amazing and thoroughly appreciated. You can get in touch with me by commenting on this video or following me on Facebook. Just search for Anouk De Silva. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll leave it there for now. Thanks for watching and happy reading. Cheers and much love.